Wallenstein by Friedrich Schiller. So, Friedrich Schiller, classic German playwright, I think considered one of the greatest of German playwrights. He was a contemporary of, and I believe an acquaintance of, Goethe. And this work, Wallenstein, is, I think, generally regarded as his magnum opus. Now, the character after which this work is titled, Albrecht von Wallenstein, is a historical personage, a very prominent figure in the events of the 30 Years' War in Europe. Now, I am not overly familiar with the history of the 30 Years' War. And I will say, though, that is a long ass time to be fighting a war. 30 years is a pretty drawn out conflict, I would say. But all I know really is that the 30 Years' War was an extended conflict between Catholic and Protestant forces in Europe, brought about, I believe, by the Protestant Reformation. And Albrecht von Wallenstein, as I said, was a very prominent figure in the mix there. He was initially a rather minor Bohemian nobleman who, through his own adroitness, eventually rose to become one of the most powerful and influential men in Europe at that time. In fact, I believe that his domain was regarded almost, at least, as kind of tacitly like a nation unto itself almost. He had some serious clout. He had some serious sway in Europe at the time. But while he initially fought for the Catholic side under the authority of the Holy Roman Emperor, he eventually kind of went rogue, or planned to go rogue at least, and in order to kind of bring an end to the war, hopefully, he was going to try to make a deal with the Protestants, and he was probably going to go over to their side in so doing. And so, fearing that one of his leading commanders was about to go rogue on him, the emperor ordered a hit basically on Wallenstein, and he was eventually assassinated. Now, I first became interested in reading this work after reading another book last year, which would be this book right here, Philip K. Dick's final novel, The Transmigration of Timothy Archer. This actually ended up being one of my best reads of last year. Really good book. You got to check this one out too. But in this book, The Transmigration of Timothy Archer, there is discussion about Wallenstein, both the man as well as the play, which was based on his life. And I'll read what Philip K. Dick has to say here about Wallenstein, because it kind of pertains to one of the most central themes of Schiller's play. So here in The Transmigration of Timothy Archer, Philip K. Dick says, "What Schiller saw in Wallenstein was a man who colluded with fate to bring on his own demise. This would be for the German romantics the greatest sin of all, to collude with fate, fate regarded as doom." Then kind of an ellipses here. The whole spirit of Goethe and Schiller and the others, their whole orientation was that the human will could overcome fate. Fate would not be regarded as inevitable, but as something a person allowed. Do you see my point? To the Greeks, fate was ananke, a force absolutely predetermined and impersonal. They equated it with nemesis, which is retributive, punishing fate. So that's what Philip K. Dick wrote about Wallenstein in his book. So ever since I read that, I wanted to read this play by Schiller. But the interesting thing about this work is that it is not just one play, rather it is a trilogy of plays, the first and shortest being entitled Wallenstein's Camp, and then the second volume being entitled The Piccolomini, and then the third and final volume of the work is Wallenstein's Death. Now, what's interesting about this is that this makes for some seriously lengthy reading, at least as regards a play. Like this Penguin edition has the Robbers in here as well, which is like Schiller's debut work, I think. I can just skip that because I just want to read the Wallenstein work. But this right here is where Wallenstein begins. And as you can see, that's like 300 odd pages almost of play. Now, for a novel, that wouldn't be much, but this is a play, or as I said, 3 plays, and that really kind of surprised me because I would think to actually perform this in its entirety, that would take several hours, I would think. Anyway, it's just kind of an interesting little aside, I thought. But so, what is the story of Wallenstein? Well, it takes place in the final days of its titular character, right prior to his assassination, as Wallenstein is gearing up to go turncoat and betray the Holy Roman Emperor and go over to the side of the Protestants in order to hopefully bring about an end to this protracted war which has devastated Europe over the years. The first volume of the work, which is entitled Wallenstein's Camp, is rather minor. In fact, Wallenstein does not even appear in that work at all. It's kind of just a prologue set in the camp of Wallenstein's soldiers, which allows us to get an insight into how the soldiers viewed Wallenstein, their commander, and it kind of builds up his presence before he actually enters the stage proper. So the next volume, the Piccolomini, is longer than Wallenstein's Camp, but it is concerned with Octavio and Max Piccolomini. Octavio is a father, and Max is a son. So Octavio Piccolomini was one of Wallenstein's subordinates. I think that is historical, although I believe that um, Max Piccolomini is actually an invented character. Schiller takes some liberties with the history, as I'm given to understand it, with this work of his, and some of these characters are fictitious and not historically grounded. And I think Max Piccolomini is actually an invention of the authors. But anyway, so Octavio is one of these subordinates to Wallenstein, as well as his son Max. And his son Max is in love with Wallenstein's daughter. There's some romantic entanglements in here. But Octavio is caught up between his allegiance to the emperor and his allegiance to Wallenstein himself. In fact, that's kind of the overall driving conflict in this whole thing. Overall, is the conflict of interest that arise within these characters as Wallenstein makes it very apparent that he's about to kind of secede from the empire and go over to the other side to bring about an end to the war and kind of go rogue. And so they're like, what do we do? Do we stay loyal to the emperor or do we stay loyal to Wallenstein? And Octavio Piccolomini is going to stay loyal to the emperor, and so he begins work to undermine Wallenstein's authority and kind of um, corrupt his forces and bring them back away from him to the empire, which will deal a major blow to Wallenstein's power. But then, of course, Max, his son, is in love passionately with Wallenstein's daughter, so there's more conflict of interest there. But then in Wallenstein's death, the action kind of just carries over from that, and Wallenstein's trustees and subordinates are one by one won over to the side of the emperor and basically betray him, kind of unbeknownst to him in some cases. And so finds himself in dire straits, and things kind of come to a head right as the Swedish forces are about to meet up with what is left of Wallenstein's forces, but he is, alas, assassinated just then, which brings the kind of a tragic conclusion to the tale of Albrecht von Wallenstein. So that's more or less the plot of this work. But let's talk about the technical aspects of it. So the writing in this is really good, actually. And this is obviously translation, but it's a really good translation because it's very easy to grasp. And, reading this is an older work. This is a couple hundred years old. Um, and I was worried that maybe it would read a little bit too archaic, and it might kind of keep modern readers at a certain remove, and I might not be able to get into it that much. But oh no, I found it very engaging. It really pulls you in, and there are some damn fine speeches written in this. It may not quite reach the heights of To Be or Not to Be or Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, but it is absolutely nothing to sneeze at. And this is some really good monologuing um, on display in Schiller's Wallenstein. There are some great speeches. There are some really epic moments where the characters just deliver these like kind of just awesome lines, very powerful lines. It's really good stuff. The writing is, and the characters in this are very good as well. The characters are very distinct and they're very complex, and Wallenstein foremost among them, because he is, of course, the figure about which all the action in this work revolves, even if he doesn't always appear on stage himself. But the characters are very distinct. They have very uh, distinct and again complex personalities. Octavio, like, really has so much affection for Wallenstein, and that's what makes this whole thing so tragic. Is that Wallenstein is not a villain in the classical sense. He's not like Macbeth, where he's just wantonly murdering a king to gain power. He is a very power hungry guy, and that's kind of what makes his character so compelling and interesting. Is because historically Wallenstein is kind of an enigmatic figure, because I don't believe that historians are really in agreement about his true motivations, whether he did or whether he tried to do what he did or tried to do in order to actually broker peace and bring an end to a destructive conflict, or just to increase his own power. And Schiller in the play kind of makes it be a mixture of both. He sees the destruction that this war is causing and has caused, and there really isn't any end in sight. So he's trying to find a way to stop that, but also he is very drunk on power and his own ego, and he really wants to break away from the emperor because he's chafing under his own subordination. Um, and so Wallenstein is a very complex figure where he's has both good and noble qualities, but also bad and ignoble qualities within him as he's um, trying to navigate some rather treacherous waters. But the secondary characters fare just as well. Again, Octavio is very complex, and all the characters that end up betraying Wallenstein feel so much remorse for doing it, because nobody hates Wallenstein. Like, Wallenstein is a cool dude. He's very charismatic. He's very charming with a very powerful personality, and everybody really likes him. But it's duty, it's business before pleasure, right? They have to adhere to their duty to the emperor, even if that means betraying and ultimately murdering a friend. And that's what happens. The characters, they're conflicted, they're at odds with themselves and their own choices here. But it makes for some very powerful drama, and Schiller gets a lot of miles out of it. And the themes of the work, the reason why I read the passage out of the Transmigration of Timothy Archer, is because the main theme of the work is destiny. It's kind of an interrogation of destiny, to see, um, to ask whether a man's faults lie within himself, or whether the faults or the fault is in his stars, so to speak. Because the thing about Wallenstein is that historically, as well as in the play, he was very, very obsessed with horoscopes. In fact, I believe historically he actually consulted Johannes Kepler, the astronomer, to cast horoscopes for him, because he was very concerned with prophecy and his own future, and kind of trying to glimpse his own future if he could. So he was very kind of superstitious and into astrology. And of course, that just makes great fodder for the conflict between free will and fate, right? Which is what the central kind of issue is at the heart of this play. Whether Wallenstein is a victim of his own hubris, or whether um, the gods just frowned upon his endeavors. Because that's kind of what Philip K. Dick was alluding to here. In ancient Greece, fate was regarded as absolute. Even the gods themselves were not exempt from fate. And if a man got too powerful, if a man got too big for his britches, if he gained too much wealth or renown or what have you, eventually fate would step in to cut him down to size. And that is what appears to be the case with Wallenstein. He reached a position of great power and great authority, and he was chomping at the bit to gain even more, but then he met an untimely end. And it's kind of up in the air as to whether this was a result of his own actions or whether it was just on the cards, whether it was just destined to be. And it really it's kind of ambiguous. I mean, you can take it either way, I guess, but it really makes once again for great drama here because it's a man who's kind of who you depending on how you read it is kind of at war with himself and undermined by his own uh, pride and his own ambition, or whether it's a man who is just drawing the ire of destiny itself. Either way, it is effective and it really kicks ass. It really does. This is a kick ass work. It's great. But I do have to say, the ending kind of let me down just a teensy bit because Wallenstein's death takes place off stage. And because of that, we don't get any epic last lines, any epic final words from him. In fact, I found it a tad bit anticlimactic because I wasn't expecting him to die off stage. I was expecting a grand epic death scene, and it didn't really give me that. So that was kind of a complaint that I had with it. But to rate Wallenstein overall, I'm going to give this an A. I really am. It is a kick-ass play. I loved it. I thought it was great. It was very engaging, very compelling, and it really draws you in, or at least it did with me. The complaints that I have with it mainly had to do with the fact that I'm not entirely sure exactly how necessary the first volume of this work was. Wallenstein's Camp. It's short compared to the other entries. It doesn't really. I don't even think any of the characters in that first play, Wallenstein's Camp, actually even appear in the later plays. It feels very disconnected, and really it feels kind of tacked on. I don't even think that really needed to be in there. I think Schiller just inserted that to kind of build up Wallenstein's presence a little bit before he comes on stage. But then again, that's already kind of done in the second play, the Piccolomini, because he appears rather scarcely in that, and you kind of feel his presence more than you actually see it in that play anyway. So the first volume of this work kind of feels extraneous and tacked on. And also, again, I was kind of disappointed that Wallenstein's death occurred off stage. That we didn't get to have any kind of grand epic death scene, any grand epic finale to the title character. But other than that, I really don't have much to complain about. The characters in this are memorable, they are distinct, and they're very complex. And their plight is one that I think will really hook you, or at least it did with me. And again, Wallenstein foremost among them. Schiller gets a great mileage out of this character and his story. Um, and I thought it was just really great drama. It's a really great play or plays, really great work. So overall, I'm going to give Wallenstein an A. I thought it kicked ass, and I really loved it. So Wallenstein by Friedrich Schiller. Have you read Wallenstein? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything I've said about it here today. And if you haven't read Wallenstein, I could really recommend this. If you're trepidatious about going into a play that it's this old, because this is a pretty old work, don't be, because at least when this Penguin translation, it was very accessible and easy to get into, and it really kept me hooked. It was really kind of a page turner, honestly. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I think that a lot of other people, a lot of other potential readers out there will as well. So yeah, I could strongly recommend this. And as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.